Welcome to the Ask for the Skinny podcast with a guest. I'm proud to present Barry Levine. Barry
Levine, but that's
Levine,
okay.
sorry. Welcome to the show. Barry, please tell us more about yourself. What's your story?
Well, I always tell people I'm just an old hippie who happens to practice law. I grew up in Brooklyn. I've been living in Massachusetts for longer than I can remember. And I've been representing debtors now, as I was explaining to Peter, December 19th will be 45 years. And, I pretty much, anybody who has financial problems, I hope to be the guy they deal with to find a solution for it. And I try to make the process uh, easy. People have a great fear of bankruptcy and the unknown and things along like that. I don't tell them right away about the ritual sacrifices. I wait for later for that. But, the thing is, as I said to you before, it's only money. Thank God it's not their health. So that's who I am.
So, my idea is to name this podcast How Midlifers Use Bankruptcy as a Tool. Can we talk
Sure.
about that? And when we have accumulated a lot of debt in our midlife, it often feels like we are slave to this debt. So, what is the way out? How should we prepare? How should we mentally prepare? What should we expect?
Well, the thing is, one of the things that provides a lot of business for me is the fact that, a lot of people don't have the intestinal fortitude to deal with creditors and the lawsuits and this and that. And granted, I've been doing this a long time. And a lawsuit, recently I found that people on filing bankruptcies in the time that up until we file bankruptcy, they'll get served a lawsuit and they'll get served a this. And, they drive me crazy about it, but the reality is it's meaningless because if anything, you'll discharge the debt in your bankruptcy. And instead of being just a general unsecured debt, it'll be an unsecured debt with a judgment. It's still getting zilch, but I think, as I mentioned before when we were chatting, people need to sort of be proactive. If you're a small business person or even an individual, you need to look at yourself and say, well, if the shit hits the fan, what am I at risk of losing? What exposure do I have? And once you analyze that, you try to figure out a way to make yourself judgment proof. The best way to be is judgment proof because you can take your $1 million judgments, and I don't know if people will know what I'm saying. You could wipe your tuchus with them. That's what they're worthless. But the problem is most people, I suffer from a good deal of inertia, and most people suffer from the same thing, so nobody does anything. And surprisingly, I'll have people call me up on a Friday morning and saying my house is being foreclosed upon this afternoon. And, it's still America. That doesn't happen. You get notices over a period of months, and so where's this person been? And that's the problem. People very often are reactive. I know I am. And you have to try, and it's not a fan favorite of mine, to be proactive, to look at what can hit you, especially if you're in business, a small business person, because usually you sign personal guarantees. And do you have a house? Is there equity in the house? Do you have a bank account with thousands of dollars in it that may not be exempt if something happens? These are things you should be aware of. Ignorance, my mother always thought ignorance was bliss, but it doesn't work that way.
So, how many people are filing for bankruptcy these days? We have.
Well, the numbers, in my opinion, and if my assistant was here, I'd call her in too because we've been together for 18 years, are staggering. Since January of 2024, we have been the busiest we've ever been. And I'm talking about filing bankruptcies for, there was a time where if somebody would come to me with $10,000 worth of debt and they'd be in their 20s, I'd say, hey, maybe you don't want to file a bankruptcy. Maybe you want to do something else. But nowadays, from their 20s to people in their 80s, And, the unfortunate thing about it is somebody who's in their 80s, my feeling to say to them is you probably won't live long enough for them to collect the money from you. But the anxiety of the creditor calls and the notices and the lawsuits, they go through a bankruptcy. They're on Social Security. What does the creditor think they're going to get from them? But that's what you have to do. I mean, it's running, and the other thing that's been happening a lot is that a lot of people during COVID here, the SBA was very kind to small businesses and they were giving a lot of businesses uh, very nice loans. Probably businesses that didn't deserve it, but they got very nice loans. And a lot of these businesses were able to survive COVID, but now buying has changed, selling has changed. They didn't survive that. And I'm finding that what we're doing is liquidating the business, not necessarily through a Chapter 11. There are other ways to do that in Massachusetts. And then filing a personal bankruptcy for the principal who has been saddled with the SBA loans. And, people don't seem to realize that while certain taxes may be non-dischargeable in a bankruptcy, like trust fund taxes, withholding taxes, that the employer takes out but doesn't necessarily pay to the government. Um, the SBA is a dischargeable debt. And that's what I'm finding now. It's very busy, and it's across. Friendly with a lot of the trustees. It's across the board.
Can we also discuss? We mentioned that in preparation for this podcast. There are also a lot of medical bills to pay, especially if you go into cancer treatment or stuff like that. How does that work? Is there
I,
any?
I missed I missed that.
There are a lot of medical bills to pay if you go into cancer treatment or similar. Uh,
They get discharged in a bankruptcy like anybody else. It's unfortunate. There are a lot of people. I mean, as we mentioned, to me, the three things that are causing bankruptcies, it's been a number of years now, are a person who's been downsized. They were making X, now they're making X minus Y. A
mhm,
person who's lost their job and somebody who has medical bills not covered by insurance, and they'll croak you. I know from my own experience, you go in for a checkup, it costs thousands of dollars, and
mhm,
not everybody has coverage for that. And the only way to get rid of that, at least I look at it, and I don't, I do podcasts where I rant about debt settlement companies. Don't get me started about that. If you're blind in your left eye and you lost your right arm, we have a special program for you. It's all bullshit, and you get 1099s and all this other stuff. But the medical bills, they go away like anything else. It's the easiest way to deal with them. I mean, years ago, listen, nobody likes to file a bankruptcy.
mhm.
And years ago, I had a very nice letter I used to send out on a word processor. I don't know if you remember those. And it would tell the creditors, my clients retain me to file a bankruptcy, but they'd rather pay you 10 cents on the dollar than file a bankruptcy. And the creditor's response was, we'll take 60 cents on the dollar. And, I would not really go into an extended back and forth, but I said, listen, they can pay me a couple of grand, not pay you a dime, and be done with it.
Mhm.
Oh, no, 60 cents. It's like, okay, you'll get the docket number. And, that's how they deal with these things. It's not, you have to realize, and I think I said, it's only money. People, uh, and I know it's easy for me to say it's what I do for a living. Though I do open heart surgery in the weekends, I learned on Google, in the back alleys. I make a lot of money that way. The it's you just have to do it because otherwise, like I said, you're an indentured servant. I mean, I have people that say when after they pay their credit cards, they have $200 left over. They have three kids and have the rent to pay. How far does that go? You know what mishigas is?
No.
Insanity in Yiddish.
Ah, okay.
That's what it is. It's mishigas.
Okay. So there are situations where there's no other way to deal with financial issues than bankruptcy. And you said that we first have to be mentally prepared to do it because it's still, let's call it, it has like this negative connotation. Like,
It still has a stigma. I mean,
yeah.
I have people who, they tell me they never believe they're sitting here and doing this. I mean, like I said, I'm a cynic. You have to do what you have to do. You can't worry about it. The credit, what actually, you know what the credit card companies do? They'll have people that'll come in and they'll say, well, they charge the debt off.
Mhm,
Charging the debt off means nothing. What they do is it really means they're not going to collect it from you. But 5 years later, they'll sell it to some bottom feeder who buy a whole portfolio of their charged off credit cards for 10 cents on the dollar. And you'll get a letter from Joe Schmo that says, you now owe us 10 grand.
mhm,
And the only way that goes away, and it happens when people go bankrupt too. After they get their discharge, they'll get a letter like that. And I have a very nice letter that I send those people. But, the only way to get rid of it is to file a bankruptcy. If you manage to get a mutual discharge from a creditor by paying them something, that's your business. If it happens, more power to you. But very often, the creditor will give you a 1099 forgiveness of debt, which could become a taxable event, whereas in bankruptcy, your debt is discharged by operation of law. There are no 1099 forgivenesses of debt involved.
mhm.
So it's you may not want to, but you must.
Okay, so we talked about stigma. Can we discuss a bit chapter 7 and chapter 11? Who
Sure.
who should think about chapter 7 and who should go for chapter 11?
Well, the for individuals, the one thing you forgot the chapter 13.
Mhm,
For individuals, it really comes down to chapter sevens and chapter 13s, which is all guided by household income. So, for instance, and I have a little handy dandy chart here that if you're a household of four in Massachusetts, every state has a different standard based on IRS statistics. If you make over $172,000, you are a Chapter 13 candidate. And the difference between the two is a Chapter 7, which is what I prefer, is a straight liquidation. If we would file, your case wouldn't go on for 8 years unless there was some really interesting stuff going on. If we filed your case today, 4 months from now, you get your discharge in Chapter 7, right? A Chapter 13 ties people into a 5-year payment plan. And there's a little computer program that determines what your disposable income is, which, as my father used to say, if he had wheels, he'd be a baby carriage, is very often the case. It has nothing to do with reality. But, if you're a high earner, you can find yourself in a Chapter 13 making a pretty sizable payment every month to your creditors. And in 5 years, you get a discharge.
mhm,
That to me doesn't do anything for anybody. Chapter 13s also are used or can be used for people who uh, have mortgage arrears.
mhm,
In a Chapter 13, provided you can make all your current mortgage payments and expenses, you can pay your mortgage arrears out over 5 years. So this way, rather than face a foreclosure, if you have, and I've had people, I have a young gentleman with a mortgage arrears of $180,000, uh, you can theoretically, and I do say that truly, theoretically pay it through 5 years of the plan. Of course, you get to the issue, is any house worth paying the $6,000 mortgage plus the $4,000 or $5,000 plan payment? I don't know, but it's not my house. But, those are the differences. On the rare occasion, an individual may have to file for a Chapter 11 because they're above the statutory limit of 13s as to amounts of debt,
Mhm.
or they have a full-blown business that they happen to be running as a sole proprietorship for some bizarre reason. But Chapter 11s are just another thing altogether. What they have now, uh, rather than uh, putting every small business, and I deal mostly with small businesses, they have a process. It's called the Subchapter V, Chapter 11, which is for small businesses. It's a sort of a streamlined process. Uh, I'm just going through one now. It takes about a year, whereas a full-blown Chapter 11 can be endless. But you don't find many individuals filing Chapter 11s. It's not like I said, only if they're above, and offhand I don't know. It has to do with a mortgage, total amount of mortgage debt and total amount of unsecured debt. But 7 and 13 is what most individuals file. And like I said, my preference is a 7 because, you file it and 4 months later you get your discharge. There's in both of them, so there's what they call the Section 341 meeting, called a meeting of creditors. It has been decades since a creditor has actually shown up at one of these meetings. In the Chapter 7, when the notice goes out, the notice usually says that this is an assetless case. Don't call us, we'll call you. And even though the meetings take place, much like we're sitting here on Zoom by Zoom, they don't even bother. And on top of that, the Chapter 7 trustees, who are all attorneys like myself, most of whom around these parts I know for 45 years, they get paid $65 in an assetless case. They
Mhm.
don't tend to spend a lot of time. In fact, what I tell clients is that unless you're the first case when they start, the odds are that the wait will be longer than the meeting itself. The Chapter 13 also has a 341 meeting. It's a little more serious. I dress like this for both of them. And sometimes I have a T-shirt that says "I saw Jerry," but the only thing she really is interested in is the plan payments because the Chapter 13 is a self-funding office, the Chapter 13 trustee who administers the 13. So she basically gets a 10% of what the payments are over the course of the 5 years. So they do all right. But those for individuals, that's what I always recommend for small businesses that are just looking to go out of business. I prefer not to put them through the intrusiveness of a Chapter 7. And in Massachusetts, there's something called an assignment for the benefit of creditors, which lets you liquidate a business voluntarily.
Mhm.
And the reason I do that is, in a Chapter 7, corporations and LLCs don't get discharges. The reasons individuals don't do assignments is in a Chapter 7, they get a discharge and all the debts become yesterday's news. What happens for a Chapter 7 corporation is if there are any assets, they get liquidated, but the corporation still exists. It has nothing, but it doesn't get a discharge of its debts. If there are any assets, they get distributed to the creditors. So the assignment is the same thing, and there's no 341 meeting. It's basically a paper transaction, which, I recommend for small businesses.
Okay, can we talk a bit about credit ratings? What happened with our credit score? Uh,
Credit scores, we have a little an app that tells us um, we pull a credit report before we file somebody's bankruptcy, and it tells us what somebody's credit score is going to be in a year, and most of them go up 100 points. The it sure it's going to impact your credit score for a few years, and it's going to make it more difficult to get a loan, a credit card. But, as we mentioned, like I say, I keep Kafka on my desk for a reason. Creditors look at most debtors, they make a decent living. They make 40, 50, 60, some of them even more a year, a grand a year. And post discharge, they'll give somebody like that a credit card with a little, $500 line of credit, figuring that they can't file bankruptcy again for 8 years and they'll see what happens. So, that's out there. And the other way to develop new credit, as I mentioned, is this is along the easier said than done, is to try to develop a relationship with a small bank that could look at you as an individual that, there was a reason behind why you filed bankruptcy. It wasn't because you took a cruise around the world. It's because you lost a job or God forbid something medical happened or something like that. Um, Rather than like a Bank of America, they don't give you the time of day. The other thing that people can do, well, creditors who go through a bankruptcy who continue to have mortgages and car payments, that will stand in their favor, provided, and I don't know if you want to listen to a lot of legal bullshit, provided they reaffirm the debt. Do you know what happens? And this is another reason this is very interesting. Uh, when you go through a bankruptcy and you have a car loan or a mortgage on your house and you do nothing, you get your bankruptcy discharge and you just keep making the mortgage. The car's a better example. You keep making the car payments, and 10 months later, the car shits the bed, dies. You still owe 30 grand on the car.
Hmm.
By doing nothing and going through bankruptcy, you've discharged that debt.
Okay.
So you wouldn't be on the hook for it. The same thing if you paid the mortgages as long as you could and they foreclosed and there was a deficiency. Because you got your discharge, that deficiency is discharged. Well, of course, there's a process to deal with that, and it's called the reaffirmation of the debt. And what happens, and I use it mostly with real estate, not necessarily cars, because cars, you have to look at the value of the car against what you're agreeing to reaffirm. If the car's worth 10 grand and the loan's 30 grand, well, you want to still be on the hook for it if the car dies. Um, but uh, what the reaffirmation agreement is, the bank, the lender sends you this. We complete it with the debtor's income, expenses, send it back to the creditor who sends it to the court, and the judge has to approve it.
Hmm.
And by approving it, it means that the debt survives your discharge. So the story I'm going to tell is a client of mine back in the aughts before there was a big computer business crash. His business died. He had no income. We filed a bankruptcy. He had a house somewhere south of Boston that he couldn't make the mortgage payments on, and the house was significantly underwater.
Hmm.
And so there was no way the court would allow him to reaffirm the debt because, you know, he has no income. The foreclose tomorrow. He's going to, what purpose does the bankruptcy serve if he's on the hook for the deficiency? So he got his discharge, and I didn't hear from him probably, had to be 7, 8 years. He calls me up. He somehow he managed to keep the house, make
Hmm.
the mortgage payments to his bank. And mortgage rates had gone down. It must have been in the teens. And he wanted to refinance the house. So he went to his bank and he said, listen, I've been making 8 years worth of payments on this mortgage and I'd like to reaffirm it. I'd like to refinance it. They do a credit report. They go, you can't. You never reaffirmed the debt. It was discharged in your bankruptcy.
Hmm.
But I've been paying it for 8 years. He had to go to a different bank.
Hmm.
Because according to the bank, even though they got 10 years worth of payments, it was discharged. So what they do with the payments? And I was friendly with a legislator here, and I drafted a statute, but they had better things to do than pass it because I just wanted to make them have to report the payments.
Hmm.
What's the problem with that? But that's the thing I was going to get at. So if you go that payment route, and when you don't reaffirm it, that's why I never do it with houses because people eventually want to get another mortgage or something like that. But cars, the problem with cars nowadays, you talk about midlife crises. I've had a number of people, and My crisis was decades ago, but they're much younger than both of us probably. And, they see the fancy new car, and what the car dealers do here now is so you're underwater in car A, they agree to put them into car B, which creates a more underwater loan for them. So now they're driving a $20,000 car that has a $50,000 loan
Yep.
on it and getting back to Michigas. I mean, what are we paying on? And like something like that, I would never have them reaffirm that debt. That would be insane.
Mhm.
It's like I rarely have them reaffirm leases that are at the end of the lease time because they'll nick you for all the charges.
So how should we finish this? How should we wrap up? When should people go and say enough is enough? I can no longer take this burden. When is the
I,
right
you
time?
know, I,
How should
I I
we?
think it comes down to, and it comes down to shoveling shit against the tide. If at the end of the month you barely have enough money to eat, or you can't even go out to eat, and I'm talking not necessarily a fancy restaurant.
Mhm.
McDonald's can cost you $100 today for a family of four. You have to be cognizant of where your money is going. And the thing is, you can't be afraid of saying, I can't pay these people anymore. So what's going to happen? They'll nudge you with a phone call. And now, because everybody gives them their cell phone numbers and email addresses, they'll send you an email. I mean, now, if you have a credit card, excuse me, and it's very annoying. And the payment is due on the 12th. The 12th is a Sunday. They can't make a payment on a Sunday. On the 13th, you get a payment you can notice an email that it's overdue.
Mhm.
And I'm one of those people that annoys me. It makes me feel like not paying them. But the thing is, that's what you have to be aware of. I mean, and the thing is, perhaps, and we should touch a little bit. I don't know how much time we have. You can't be afraid of the collection process
Mhm.
because it's geared to buy you time. The thing is, creditors, you know, there was a comedian, I don't know if you remember when you used to travel in Europe, you used to be able to send correspondence, or if you needed money from mom and dad to
Yeah.
an American Express office. He used to send his bills to an American Express office, and they would just continue to go around the world. He'd never get them. But what you want to do is when the creditor itself doesn't like to give up the debt because now they have to share it with someone if they're getting anything. So they will continue to nudge you calls, emails. They'll eventually send you a letter. And that letter is going to say, if you dispute the amount, send it to us in writing in 30 days. They don't charge you to dispute the amount. It's a credit card. You either bought the shit or you didn't buy the stuff. But you dispute it because it buys time. And it costs you, what's the stamp? 72 cents now? Used to be a nickel. But it's worth sending that correspondence. Then the creditor will eventually get annoyed and send it to a collection agency. All the collection agency can do is nudge you too, send you letters, call you, but they'll send you that letter with that. If you dispute this, send us a notice within 30 days. Same the dispute letter, it even buys more time because it has to go from the collection agency back to the creditor and then back to the collection agency, back to you. Then they'll eventually, because the collection agency doesn't get paid, they'll send it to an attorney. And hopefully the attorney is in the state you live in because often it'll be in some other state and who cares? But they'll send you that same demand letter. You send them the same, you change the address, but you send them and now you bought time. And
But when
the
is
only
time to quit and
you
say
will the
enough is enough?
as I said, the only thing that concerns me from a bankruptcy point of view that needs to be acted upon quickly, a foreclosure, a wage garnishment, and a seizure by the IRS or the Mass Department of Revenue or something like that.
Okay.
Credit is suing you. Let's take as much time as we want.
Okay, Barry. Thank you very much for these insights. Before we finish, Please tell us where can our listeners and viewers
You
get in
can
touch.
look me up online, www.levinslaw.com. That's levinslaw.com. Or you can email me because I hate talking on the phone, but I do answer emails. Barry, and it's with a small b, at levinslaw.com. Or you can see my podcasts on YouTube, and I actually wrote a book, and it's available on Amazon. Bankruptcy Through the Looking Glass. I hear it's a good laugh.
Thank you very much. And I will include all the links in the description below. Thank you, Barry, for being my guest tonight.
Stay well, everyone.